Okay. So I'm Dhruv. I was about to say I'm Devyani. I'm Dhruv, and and
Do we want to
you're
start again?
Devyani, you're Dev.
It's coming to midnight when we're
Yeah.
recording this.
We're here to talk about the final three of the Southern
Mhm.
Cone. Now, the Southern Cone is the second region that the box has been through. We've been through all the stages, and we're down to the last three, and we're here to talk about why these books stayed with us. The three countries are Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile, right? So, Dave, I'll start with you. We've got three books in the final three that have made it to the end. And it's just a matter of coincidence that they're from each of the three countries that we picked. So, from Argentina, we have
The Queens of Sarmiento Park.
Sarmiento Park by one of my favorite, by an author who I was mesmerized with before I even read a book, Camila Sosa Villada. The second book that is a part of the final three is one of my favorites and one of Dave's not favorites, but she likes the
Oh,
book.
let's get into that.
It's Chilean Poet by Alejandro Zambra. And the third book, Dave.
Is The Hand That Feeds You by Mercedes Rosende from Uruguay. Yeah.
Okay, so we are going to talk about these books, but first, let's talk about the region. Let's talk
Hmm.
about what you expected from the region and what was completely unexpected from the region.
I think it'll be interesting to do the take because this was when you first started thinking about the box, this was the region that you started exploring,
The
right?
most
So
researched
this
region of the
the Southern
box.
Cone region, you were with it for almost, I don't know, months and months and months. And there was a whole different set of books at that time that came up.
Mm,
And for
mm,
whatever reason, we decided to launch with a different region. And then we came back. And when we came back to Southern Cone, now having the wisdom and the learnings from having launched the box with a different region, there was a slightly different way that we looked at the books, right?
yeah, yeah.
Because previously, when I think in the first go, we were looking for perhaps a little bit more commercial kind of books,
Mm,
and we were playing a little bit safe. So when we came back to it again, we said, oh, you know what? Actually, it doesn't matter. Let's not be hesitant with the kind of stories that we want to pick. Let's just pick the ones that we want. Let's not think that these are the stories that readers might like and do something which we don't like, which we don't like the current publishing industry doing the gatekeeping. Let's not do the gatekeeping. Let's just
yeah.
go with, we love the
Uh,
story, so we want to bring it here, right?
when we're talking of gatekeeping, okay, I'm going to read a line from one of the books.
Mm.
But what she said, I think, is so true of the box. And once I read the line, you obviously will know what that says. And I'm not going to talk about I'll tell you which book, and you can see the book here. Okay. I'm just going to read these
Yeah.
lines. Down below the equator, right at the end of the world, we banded together to dig up the world travesty. It had been decorously buried under terms that were completely alien to us. People were calling us trans women, transsexuals, or transgender, and even mentioned conditions such as gender dysphoria and sexual dissidence. Once again, Northern academia was being thrust upon us, while down here we were busy surviving, living, fucking, and eating, even if all there was on our plates was dirt. I think this is
Yeah.
I, I don't know. I read that line and I was like, that's why we're doing the box.
Yeah.
Uh, that is the box. It's
Yeah.
everything we're trying to break out of. And I think I've digressed, but coming back to your line, this was, I think, one of the stories that I kept thinking about. I mean, I was very sure about the author. I was 100% on Camilla. I was like, when we say we're going looking for local, credible voices, I was very sure she was one of them. The problem was with the way the blurb was written, right? It was about these group of transgender women who were going across, who had come upon a child abandoned in the park and decide to raise the child. that same typical story with a beginning and a middle and an end. And honestly, what I read was something very, very different, and
Yeah.
we'll talk about it later.
I realized that I was buying a lot of books based on the blurbs, and they never lived up to it. So what I've sort of started doing about a decade ago now is that if I go to a bookshop or whatever, I have to read the first page to actually get a sense of what the writing is, what the narration style is, what the story is, and then the blurb may or may not be. But unless I actually read the first page, I'm not going to be able to tell. So with Camilla's, I think a lot of her videos, there's just tons and tons of material, but all of it's in Spanish. Unfortunately, I don't speak
Mm,
Spanish.
mm,
But that particular book, I think it's been published in different names with different titles
mm.
in different places. I think it's called Bad Girls in the U.S., published
Yeah,
as Bad Girls in the
yeah.
U.S. Queens of Sarmiento Park here. But again, I think if you think about contemporary, is that story contemporary? Do you think?
I think it's set in the 90s
Mm.
in Sarmiento Park. It's kind of a setting, um, but there's not so much about the political commentary of that time. I mean, there are bits of it about how the police come after them and how there's corruption and how they have to kind of flee from one place to the other. The way people look at them, and I'm not sure that's how people would look at them had the story been based in today's day and age. But seeing how her comment section is limited and how she doesn't accept DMs from strangers, I don't think much has changed in the world
Yeah,
regarding
yeah,
the kind of hate crimes that is going on against people from the transgender community. But yeah, it is for all practical purposes set in the 90s. But then, I mean, the story landed really in a very different way
yeah,
for me.
yeah.
I'm from a small town. She grew up in a small town, and she was living a different life with her parents, and she was out discovering herself. It was just for me. It was just a beautiful coming of age story. That's all it was for me. Um, of course, it was being told by a certain person with a certain kind of experience, and the way she weaved just would throw in magical realism through the door as if nothing happened, and you continue reading the book as if nothing happened, and that's just how good she is. But for me, it was just a very beautiful coming of age story that had a center of culture that then breaks down over a period of time, and everybody goes their own way. And it could have been a rock band, it could have been a music band, it could have been a theater group that created trouble in a city and went away. It's just so much more than what the blurb ever tried to make this
Yeah,
book. And I don't know how I would have written a blurb alternatively for this, but the
yeah,
story for me was a coming of age story. And I just love how kind she was to me as a reader. She could have, she could have put the knife in and plunged it and twisted it, and I would have come away with a very different experience of this book because of
mm,
the kind of experiences that she has. But every scene where there is any kind of sexual assault, where there's any kind of name calling, you
mm,
always feel that she's being gentle with you as a reader, and she's not really giving you the extent of the pain and the hatred and the anger that she would have felt at that point of time. And I just felt grateful for that as a reader. I just felt like I could just travel with this person who started as a teenager and then went on to, I think probably 2025 is when the book kind
with the
of
book.
ends. Yeah, but that was the journey for me with Queens of Sarmiento Park.
Yeah, for me, I think kind of similar experience. I just felt it didn't kind of it is a very human story. I felt completely very deeply connected. I just couldn't sort of stop reading it. And the bit that you mentioned about magic realism, and I tried to read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and
But yes.
I just couldn't. I would pick up these books, and they're supposed to be these literary gems and greats, and I kind of I'd read them and put the book down, and I just couldn't get over it. And I was like, I'm not clever enough for these books, or magic realism is not my genre. And then when I was reading this particular book, I didn't even notice it.
Mm,
And I finished reading the entire book, and then somebody says, "Oh, I love the magic realism bits in the story." It's like, "Oh, really? Like, what are you talking about?" I was like, "Oh yeah, what about the headless man?" It's like, "Oh yeah, the headless man. Yeah, the headless man is the headless man. Of course, he's the headless man." Right? And
yeah.
that is for me, it is just so beautiful. The skill of the writer, obviously, in how she's writing. And more than that, it was just that I wanted to be with where, to go on the journey, like you said.
Mhm.
I felt like, you just take me anywhere, I'll go with you. You
Yeah.
want to take me into your past right now, and you're 17, and you're dressing up and you're running away and you're hiding your clothes somewhere else, going to a party. Yes, I'll go with you. And I'm, what's happening to the baby that you adopted? I don't know that part of the narrative. That's fine. You want to go here? Let's go here. And I just felt kind of, that, yeah. And that's again, when if you're looking at it from a technical and analytical point of view of writing books, these are difficult choices that the author makes. But as a reader, that experience was just, for me, it was beautiful. Yeah, I cried so many times, obviously. That's, and anybody that can make you sort of move and feel, yeah, just it's yeah. So is that your favorite of the lot? Uh,
Is that my favorite?
of the final three?
It's I love this book. Okay, there's no
Yeah.
doubt I love this book in a very different way, and we're going to talk about the other book that I also
Yeah.
love from this region. But it's I mean this book is right up there amongst any other books that I've read in life and in the region. I'm going to remember this book. I think it's not so much about whether I loved it and how much I loved it. I think I will remember this author and I will remember this book for a long time just because of the way it made me feel. Um, and you keep reading these terms atmospheric all over on reviews and stuff, and I don't really understand the word atmospheric, but I finally do with this book because
Mm,
you feel like you're there. You feel like
mm.
you were there. You feel like you were a part of that journey. You feel like you lived in that house, that pink house, with the
Yeah.
aunt whose name I've now forgotten.
And Enkana, Auntie Enkana, who, by the way, is 178 years old, and I didn't even notice. And then later on, when I was actually thinking about, why is she 178 years old, right? And
Yeah.
then I realized that, and this is when the kind of, the penny dropped for me about how magic realism actually works, the symbolism of it all. And I
Mm.
was thinking about this character, there was this one scene, spoiler alert for people who are reading, but towards the end of the book where the baby that they had found abandoned and who's now in kindergarten, the auntie in Kana actually brings him, she's walking on the street with this baby, but she is not, she is wearing man's clothes, right? And our main character, Camila, doesn't recognize her. She's like, who's this? This is Auntie in Ghana. And, why isn't she wearing her normal clothes? And I was thinking about how many lives has this person led, right? If you
Mm.
think about just how many lives they're leading concurrently, obviously they're going to be 78 years old. And it's like, wow. And I was like, oh my God, of course she had to be 178 years old because how could she live like a man, like a woman, like an auntie who's looking after, like a mother? She could
Mm.
not have lived all of those years without being 178. And I was like, wow, this is so clever.
There's another reason why I think the story stayed with me, right? Which is, had it been, and you asked this question, right? Well, was it written today or was it written somewhere in the 90s? And I felt somewhere it was easier for me to connect with the story, even though
Hmm,
the hate is the same. It's as modern as it was in the 90s. But it was easier for me to connect with the hatred that she went, she and so many like her
hmm,
have gone through, but not based in today, based in some and just to think, oh, probably the world was a cruel place in the 90s and people weren't aware of these things, and somehow make excuses for people who just live in hate. uh, but you're just able to land it because it's a story set somewhere else. And had this been a contemporary today's day, it would have just felt too close to reality. Maybe the violence would have felt more real,
yeah,
maybe the brutality. I just felt it was gentler because it was placed in the past, and you could think about a place that doesn't exist anymore, and probably it's you don't think about whether it's easier today or not, but you kind of you're like, yeah, it must have been a time when hatred was around. I mean,
hmm,
in some ways, the way I think about racism in the UK, uh, if you talk about in today's day and age, it's not so. From a storytelling. But if somebody tells me the stories of about how it was in the 80s, it's kind of it feels like a story that you're being told, and so you can listen. And I think that's one more reason why the story stayed with me.
hmm.
So shall we move to the next book?
To the next one? Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
What do
Chilean
you want?
poet?
Okay.
Let's hear. And you start with
I picked the Chilean poet the first time around when we were doing the long list. And I remember it didn't really make the short list and the curated shelf. And then we went looking for a book again. And I read the blurb again. And this is the book that I went in through a blurb, very different from The Queens of Sarmiento Park. I liked the story. It felt like there was a promise, and the blurb was about a Chilean up and coming poet who has an affair with a woman, and they part ways, and then he comes back to his town many years later. That was kind of the blurb, and I like some of these, the one that got away love stories, and I thought that was what this was going to be about. I really came in expecting one of those rom-com kind of a books, and it was anything but that. It was a book about love and romance, but in a very different way. Again, completely unexpected. Okay, and of course, it is a narrative by a male in Chile, but I was just fascinated by everything. I was fascinated by the crude humor, two horny teenagers going at it day in, day out. And you're like, is this what this book's going to be about? And where is this book going to go? And from there, suddenly we've jumped to another day and age where they're married, they have a son, but the son is not his. And that's the bit that got me the most, that this country that is obsessed so much with poetry that it's made a national pastime out of it. And there are poets, and I checked, one of them was had also died sadly 5 or 6 years ago, who had been included in this book. He was the only poet I researched because I think it was 109, 110. I was like, is he even around? Is this even a real person? And I did find out that yes, there was somebody like that. But every time the book returns to a different time and age, it's a different place, it's a different feel, it's a different vibe, it's a different emotion. And I just felt, again, being taken along this journey that was so wild, filled with mad characters, eccentric poets, a journalist who's trying to find her way through all of this, with one senior journalist flirting with her and maybe falling in love with her. And yet it comes back in the end to the relationship, which doesn't have a name, between the one we started with and his partner's son. And the ending is beautiful. And I just felt, again, it was really unexpected for me. It was just an experience. I think I didn't expect it at all. I know you have a very different point of view about this book, but I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
no, I think the reason why you from the blurb why you picked the book was the reason from the blurb why I didn't pick the book at the beginning, right? Because the blurb makes it sound like, okay, here's this about, sort of this disillusioned or would-be poet where he reconnects with his ex-girlfriend and has a son, and then, years later they come back together, and kind of, it was just made to sound so, like I was like, do I want to kind of, read 400 pages or whatever it is, about kind of, a frustrated poet and, ending with his midlife crisis. And it's like, I've got like, there's enough of, just men's problems around me that get shoved in and out. Do I want to spend like 400 pages or whatever doing this? And I think that was the thing that put me off. And to be honest, when I was reading right at the beginning as well, it really did feel like that for me as well. It very much felt like a man's point of view
Man's problem in a
about
man's world.
yeah, men's problem, and just being inside this man's head, Gonzalo, and what he's trying to do and achieve, and all of these very interesting things. And it annoyed me that the women characters, I felt like they didn't weren't getting enough of love in terms of how multidimensional they could be, or they were again for me, and that's what the part of the male narrative, it felt like, oh my god, here's a picture, Carla needs to exist because otherwise you won't have this stepson,
They
right?
have the step done, yeah.
But her characters, like here, even the female journalist, the American Prue, I liked her, but then it felt quite removed for me. I think the emotional connection was very removed. It felt like the narrator. It was very much the author's voice that I saw on every single page, and for me, that's kind of the way the story was told. It made me laugh. Yeah, there were lots of bits where some of these very clever observations and takes, and uh, things about lives, and the Chilean obsession with poetry, and then suddenly around 300 odd pages later, there's one paragraph where this journalist proves she is going back to the US. And the author suddenly goes, okay, you know what? I want to go back with her. Up
Mm.
until now, it's all third person voice. And suddenly he goes like, oh, I want to go with Prue and follow her to New York and see what's here. But no, but I must stay here. I must stay here with Gonzalo and Vicente. If I don't know how to say the name. I must stay here because I'm a Chilean poet and I must live in Chile. And that was like, suddenly I was like, oh my God, the narrator's finally shown up. And then the later half, the remainder of the book, I sort of allowed myself to forget. I think that bit did made that change for me. It sort of helped me forget that I was reading a book written by a man about a man's story. It allowed me to just immerse in the story, and I think I found that emotional thread that was missing for me just because of that little switch, and that might just have been something. And suddenly, for the last 50 pages, I was like, "Oh my God, Gonzalo is back! He's gonna meet us." And then I found all of these things which I look for in a book where I'm thinking about, oh, what's gonna happen? Are they gonna reconnect? Will they have a relationship going forward? What's gonna happen? All of those kind of things that I'm looking for from a book. So I think having read the book and having finished reading the book, now it's a book that I'll remember. Whether I'll read it again, I probably won't read it again. But it was very interesting for me, kind of that whole journey, that experience of reading the book about the way I went into the story and what happened and the choices that the author made, and suddenly how it transformed. And then I suddenly started looking at these two men very fondly. I was
Mm.
like, okay, no longer was I judging them or, thinking about all these things, why are you making all these, decisions, or why are you behaving this way? Suddenly I'm like, you know what, yeah, these are just two people. These are just two people who are trying to, find a home, find a space, understand what the relationship is like, and build something which is so hard for all of us. And suddenly they became very human to me.
Mm.
I don't know. Yeah. So reading the book was enjoyable.
And it gives you a slice. It gives you a slice of Chile and Santiago, right? There's so much of that of those cities there
So
in
much
that book.
food. Oh my God, the food, honestly. There's so much food in the book, which I really did enjoy quite a bit.
Okay, so we're going to come to the third book now that I have only read 60% of that book. So I'm going to limit whatever thoughts I have to 60% of the book. I'm going to read it. I still need to finish it. And I think, oh, I've got the bookmark there as well. So it's not even, no, this is probably somewhere around the 50% mark. So now we're going to talk about the third story, The Hand That Feeds You by Mercedes Rosende. And Dave, what are your thoughts on this book? This book made a very weird entry into the curated shelf, right?
I think it was kind of, because we were sort of looking for a contemporary crime. We thought that, it would be nice to actually have a crime story mix, and this was one of the books that were there. But a lot of our research said that, it does bring the place alive. And when I read the
Mm.
book, it does. Like, Montevideo in this book is very much a character by its own, and it's not the touristy, wonderful ones that we actually saw on some of our research. It's like the gritty kind of, the kind of very in keeping with the crime story. So when I started reading it, actually, kind of, I was a little bit worried that it'll be because I haven't read crime in a very long time, and I was thinking, oh my God, this is going to be a bit triggering. It'll be a bit annoying, but it was such a surprising book. I started reading it. There's one perspective. There's one character, inspector or somebody, and then there's another perspective about this guy who was, he's stolen the money basically. There's another guy, and then there are 8 perspectives in the book, and I'm like,
Yeah.
what? What really happened? And only one of them is the main character, Ursula. Hers was in first person, but no. Towards the end of the book, suddenly another character goes in first person as well. It was just I loved how much freedom the author had. Not just freedom, just the confidence and the audacity for them to say, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to write is sort of a post-heist book. I'm going to have 4 women characters. I'm going to have 4 men characters. All of the men characters are going to be just useless." all of the women characters are going to be complex and they're going to be
Yeah.
clever, right? There is going to
Mhm.
be a police officer, there's going to be a detective, there is going to be the main sort of,
The
the
two
traumatized,
sisters.
very, you can't put your finger on, whether she's a good person or not, whether she's actually a murderer or not, kind of, very questionable protagonist. And the protagonist's sister, who's like your every person, kind of, very this chic and wonderful woman, who is, who's fit and who's rich and has luxury goods, but is really nice and really
Mm.
loves her sister and cares for her sister. And she every page for me in this book. I didn't know where the story was going. I was like, you know what? I don't care whether Ursula's actually murdered someone. I want her and her sister to be okay and for them to run away with this whatever money that they stole. Right? So
Yeah.
it was
I
just
mean,
such, for me, it was a fun read, right? Because I could tell that the author had fun with the story. Uh, and that fun came across for me. So I enjoyed that, as you can tell.
I didn't read, too much of the blurb before I got into it. I'm not surprised that I think this book is somebody's bought the rights to make a film of this around this as well. So I'm going to finish off the last 40% of the book, which is remaining. Um, if we take a step back, okay, and we look at these three
So,
books that we had to pick, which is Chilean Poet, The Queens of Sarmiento Park, and The Hand That Feeds You. Would you have still picked them going back now with
yep,
everything that
yep,
you've done? You've
yep.
learned, you've read these books, you've felt something about it. I know you've read three other books from the region as well. Why would you still pick these three books? Like, what makes these stories stand?
What these books did was they transported me and took me to a completely different place with characters that I had kind of, very interesting characters with very interesting lives, very interesting stories. And the stories were took, and this is perhaps it's my writer sort of, self, that goes looking for how the story is told. Because for me, if it's just told from, like a very normal A to B sort of, this is what happened. Here's your main character, and this is the journey that they go through, and this is how they change, which is the very sort of, standard way the stories are told. I snooze and I get bored now because I've read so many of those kind of stories, and you watch every single other Hollywood flick or a remake that has come, it's the same way. I love that each of these stories each of them were told in different ways.
Hmm.
Even in Queens of Sarmiento Park, right? Not only is the magic realism bits, the narrative goes back and forth, and you don't know, it's not signposted. It's not signposted
Hmm.
anywhere to say that, Camila, this is she's 17 now, she's 22 now. They are in one chapter, you'll have one paragraph like this, and then another paragraph with completely and different points of view with different characters, and you just have to make
Hmm.
sense of that. So the narrative style in which it was told, Chilean poet for that matter as well, right? It goes through right at the beginning when these guys are teenagers, then goes off to slightly when they reconnect a little bit again, and then we forget about Gonzalo, the main character, for a long time because he's gone to America, and this other American person has come for like maybe 100 odd pages, and then she disappears, and you have no idea what's happening. And this guy's come back, and you will not find those kind of stories. Like those kind of stories do not make to the shelf. And again, with
Hmm.
the same thing, 8 different points of views in the hand that feeds you, right? And then some of those
Yes.
times, the scenes and the chapters, they start with, okay, like, why are you describing, like, somebody's watch or something? And so it's a very visual cinematic. And I can very much imagine Miss Rosende thinking, thinking very visually, thinking, okay, if this is a scene and I had to shoot this, if this was a film, how would I shoot it? And she literally wrote it down like that. I don't know whether that was a process or not. So it was very, very intriguing for me.
Okay. So we're at this point with the final three, we're going to move on to the place where, the book club's open and we'll be discussing these books. We're also I think it's been a very, very intense, long journey on the Southern Cone, right? What are your takeaways? As we're leaving this region, and we're probably not going to come back to this region for the next two and a
Another
half
two
years.
years. Yeah, I think another two
Yes,
years.
maybe
Yeah.
it'll be 2028.
These countries not. We'll come back to the continent sooner.
Yeah,
Yes, but these three
yeah.
countries we may not. Yeah,
Countries.
yeah.
But just what's your take of the Southern Cone? We keep talking about how you enter the country through these books. So if the country that you entered through this, 6 or 8 books that you read, what do you make of these countries? based on these
I just
books.
felt kind of, for me, it feels like it's a country where you can be emotional, you can show your emotions, you can carry them, and you can say whatever you want without thinking. It not uninhibited as much as, not closed. Kind of, it felt just so much more open, and yeah. So that was my kind of, impression, even of Uruguay, which is such a kind of, for me at least, I did not have enough of kind of, um, yeah, connection with it before. What about you?
I think it's two words for me, eccentricity and expression. These
Yeah,
stood out for me
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah,
different ways. And
yeah.
eccentricity stood out in so many different shades. Eccentricity stood out as courage.
Hmm.
Eccentricity stood out as just allowing yourself the freedom to just go down whichever
True, true.
route you pick
Yeah,
as a
yeah,
character, as a person, as a community.
yeah.
The eccentricity with which poetry, for example, is celebrated in
Hmm.
Santiago in Chile, the eccentricity with which Camila and her friends live their lives is just I just felt like it's rich in character and eccentricity
Yeah.
in bravery and courage and just the freedom of expression, not as a constitutional right of a citizen, but as something to be celebrated, right? Expression is something to be celebrated. And I think it's just each of these books just capture them in such different ways is what I felt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very expressive. I agree. I agree.
All right. With that, we come to the end, hopefully, of this
Which was meant to be
podcast. I
20
don't think
minutes.
yeah, it was meant to be 20 minutes, and I can't without. But listen, before we go, and I know and I'll let you do this because I think you'll do it well. Um, we spoke about blurbs and
Hmm.
about troublesome blurbs.
Hmm.
Now I'm going to read a blurb from, I think, which is one of our favorite books. Okay. I'm going to read it, and I think before we go, I'd like you to create on the spot an impromptu blurb for this book. Okay.
Oh, I can't.
And just whatever you feel.
Just try.
Like if you were to describe this book to somebody else,
Yeah.
first I'm going to read
Yeah.
this and then I'm going to let you describe this book to somebody else, the next person who comes. Okay. So Auntie Encarna's is the queerest boarding house in the world. For Camilla, it is a refuge, and the travesti who gather there are like family. At night, they head out to Sarmiento Park to earn money. They stand together in the cold, sharing stories and a hip flask of whiskey, waiting for a car to slow down until one freezing evening, like da da da, which slack, Auntie Encarna hears crying in the bushes and wades in to investigate. When she finds an abandoned baby boy, she will hear no arguments. She is bringing him home to care for him. Life for Camilla and the others will never be the same again. That's the blurb of the back of the book. And if somebody else were to come to you and say, Dave, what is the Queens of Sarmiento Park
Hmm.
about? What would your blurb be?
I think the thing about the blurb, which was misleading for me, was that it focused on kind of the inciting incident, which is about them finding this abandoned baby and how their life changed, which is true, right? But it makes it sound like the book is about the experience of these group of travesti women bringing up this baby, which it isn't. It is actually, for me, it is very much Camilla's story. It is Camilla's story of sort of, it's a coming of age story. It's a story of sort of understanding who she is, understanding the world. And it's about this found family, which does, yes, include these travesti women finding the baby and their lives and what happens. But it is very much a story of love for me. So that blurb will not sell anything. But if I was to recommend it to a friend, this is what I would say. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
on that note, we're going to call it a night because it is night.
Night.
It's about past midnight on
It's morning.
on Friday. It's 12:40 at night, and I think it's a good idea to do these podcasts at night. I somehow feel like it fits the box. And let's get the three stories that stayed with us out to people who are now waiting to receive the books. And that's me and Dave calling it a night. Good night.
Good night.